Well, hello everyone. Today I'm going to begin reading to you from Merlin's Chronicles. And this I wrote in 1987. Actually, I put it together during that year as part of the part of the Source, my publication, my monthly publication, the Source. And so in the course of that year, I released segments of this information. Later, sometime later, probably a year or two later, I decided to put it together in its own compilation. So that is what this is. I can refer to it as a book, but it's, relatively short. And I'm not going to be sharing all of it because there are pieces in here that are really not directly connected to our topic. They were in those days. When I put it together, it related because there were current events going on that tied it all in. So I'm going to leave a little of it out, but most of it I am going to be reading to you. Not all at once, of course. I'm going to put it in as a series in shorter little videos so that it'll be easier for you to go through them one at a time. So before I start, though, let me see. Now, as usual, when I do this, since I wrote this so long ago, I have not read it in a long, long time. So I'm going to be reading it almost for the first time, as far as my memory goes, with all of you. I probably say in here somewhere, oh, yes, I do. I can see it right in front of me. Okay, so I won't mention that. I'll just read it. So we're going to start with Master of the Mound. We begin our journey into the past of the late 4th century through into the 5th century, an age of magic and mystics. It was a time when the ether veils were still raised in certain places on the planet. As fragments of the crystal ice canopy clung to the sky over Great Britain and portions of Europe and Asia. Now, to pause for a moment, the crystal ice canopy was a natural latticed structure of fine ice particles in the atmosphere surrounding our planet in ages past. It had many functions, one of which was a bonding to interdimensions, enabling sentient beings to slip from one closely aligned dimension to another. As the Earth's etheric charge lessened, so the canopy deteriorated. There still exists an ice canopy within the inner Earth. And for more information on that, you can see issue 381 of the Source. Those issues are no longer available for everyone, but portal members can find issue 381 of the Source in their, in their portal, in the Vault of Thoth. And of course, this series is for portal members that I'm reading here. So there was something else I wanted to mention before I continued. Oh, yes, I did forget to say that this entire treatise on Merlin has to do with only the period of time in his younger years, not when he actually got together with King Arthur and the Camelot and all of that. However, it does mention some of those characters and the truth about them and how they connect to Merlin's family and the history of all of that. So to continue, we're talking about the ice canopy that still fragments of it were collected around Europe and Great Britain at that time. It's practically the only area where there were a few little pieces of it left. Now, the ice canopy itself, I keep talking here, but the ice canopy itself, this is something that is not strictly from Thoth. There was a gentleman, I can't remember his name now, but you'd find it in issue 381, way back in the 1800s, who was talking about the ice canopy and the fact that there had been one. He wasn't going into anywhere near the detail that Thoth has gone into about it and what it represents, the interdimensional properties and all of that, but he just said that there was an ice canopy back a while in time. Okay, so now, here we find the enigmatic figure of Merlin of Galatane, known to us through legend as Merlin, Grand Wizard of King Arthur's realm. Yet it is not the wizened, somewhat eccentric Merlin of Camelot presented to us in tales which we seek, but the actual personage who long before he became author's mentor was a youthful and vital initiate, master of the mound. A loyal following aided this illumined master in his earth-changing works for the planet and its living creatures, both human and non-human. Until my mentor, Thoth, revealed to me the true and colorful Merlin, I had no interest in the storybook version. As Thoth spoke into my mind, he told me that he was one of the 5 souls of Merlin. He lifted the veil for me, and I peered into the misty folds of the goddess's robes to behold Merlin of Galatea. Before this story is told, an explanation of layered souls should first be given. When an incarnation window is opened for an aspect of karmic interaction affecting many people, often that incarnating entity is comprised of multi-souled levels. This is allotted in order for that window to become fully expressed to deal with all aspects of those many people who will react karmically to that entity's life. This is not always the case with a visible personage. Thoth in that incarnation was and is only one soul, as Thoth of Racemus, or also Thoth Mazuru. He was just one soul. Yet Merlin was 5 souls, all layered and working together through the window that was Merlin. In a layered entity, there is first the body soul, that soul which attaches directly to the body chakras, animating the physical mode and coordinating the ensuing soul layers that biolink with all other connective souls of the layered complex. It is difficult for us to contemplate more than one soul working in such unity, but with spiritually evolved entities such as Merlin or Merlin, this is accomplished. Thoth explained to me that he himself was not a product of layering because his service required single entity consciousness. Okay, I'm going to turn a page here. He did not elaborate further. In the most illuminate layers of Merlin's 5-soul structure were Thoth and one known in a later incarnation as Saint Germain. And of interest, here, because I don't think I knew this at the time, but Thoth was also one of the layered souls of Saint Germain. You see, this can get very complex, at least to our way of thinking. I don't imagine they think it's complex at all. There were then 2 other souls serving as grounding and balance factors. One is now incarnated as a female of great spiritual power in the inner earth. The other is presently in male embodiment upon the surface of the planet. I've contacted this latter individual, who was told years ago by a mystic of renown when on the Isle of Man that he was the Merlin of old. At a later time, he was told that he was the material link of a multi-spiritual being. Lastly, there is the body soul of Merlin, which was sealed away etherically and awaiting its future release when it will re-enter the physical body of Merlin, still suspended in the crystal cave. So this entity that I contacted, this person that I contacted, I'm trying to remember back, so I may not have this entirely accurate. Please understand that. But as I remember it, when I contacted him, and I didn't know him, but I saw his picture somewhere, and I knew he's a mystical, spiritual, mystical person. But I was told by Thoth, this is, one of the souls of Merlin, and I contacted him. I'm fairly sure, I'm like 90% sure that I did not know that he had been told that he was Merlin. I'm pretty sure of it, but I can't swear to it. Okay, so we continue. Merlin's family name, so Thoth informs me, was Galatane. That's Galatane. They were originally from Gaul, but his father, along with 3 aunts and an uncle and their families, came to the Isle of Man off the coast of Scotland, led by a shining one in his father's visions. It was there upon this small island that Merlin was conceived and born. Merlin's father, Hestor, and his siblings had a powerful mix of genetics, part ultra-terrestrial from Rigel in the constellation of Orion, and also some cosmorphic or fairy. This was in an age when the veils which separate the nature and human kingdoms were still fluttering in the winds of change. Thus, the fairy people, or cosmorphic beings, were still fluttering, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Let's see. I don't know why I lost it so quickly. Let's see. Could at certain levels merge their seed with humankind. Hester and his kin had a strange blend in their veins, coming from the stars, the nature realm, and the Gauls. When I received from Thoth that the Galatanes had come from Gaul, I must confess I had no idea to where Gaul was located, nor did I have an inkling of its history. In putting together the Merlin Chronicles from the original 1987 source issues, I have done some research on this subject, which has brought to light some fascinating correlations. In the new Encyclopedia Britannica, remember, again, in those days, no Google, no internet, I had to look things up in the Britannica. I had a volume, a bunch of volumes of this. I found the following information on Gaul under the history of France. Gaul, Latin Gallica, Gallia, I guess it's Gallia, was the name given by the ancient Romans to the country inhabited by the Gauls, the Celtic peoples of present France, Belgium, Western Germany, and North Italy. These people began to move south and west from the Rhine Valley before 1500 BC. They reached the Mediterranean coast by the 5th century BC, and by the 4th they had moved into Po Valley and down the Adriatic shore of Italy. There they were influenced by their more civilized Etruscan neighbors. Before the 7th century BC, they had come into contact with the Greeks and had frequent commercial relations with them after circa 600. Okay, that's the end of the quote. Since Gauls were Celts, we can see that the Galatanes were returning to their original homeland when they journeyed to Great Britain. But the most interesting find was yet to come. In reading on, I came to the historical fact that the Merovingian dynasty was in Gaul. This is the family that authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail claim to be direct descendants from Jesus's and Mary Magdalene's son. Thoth had confirmed this, although he did not agree that this child was born of a physical union between Jesus and Mary, as assumed in Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Thoth's information on the conception and birth of this child after the crucifixion is given further detail in a later chapter of this work. Thoth has also revealed that the lineage of Merlin and Jesus both stem from an ancient Egyptian Hebrew Celt named Torhana. Her history can be referenced in the Star Lotus Manual, which is no longer in existence, and issue 390 of Temple Doors. The son of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, John Martinus, was born on the Isle of Iona, given into the care of Ionian Celtic priestess Elaine, who brought him to Glastonbury, England, at the age of 2. It is clear that he was born for a purpose, another product of genetic engineering, which is so evident in Merlin's life, and thus was relinquished from the, no doubt, loving arms of his mother into the flow of destiny at a tender age. We're going to be talking a lot about genetic engineering in this. And if it was nowadays, I would have used another term. The reason for that is genetic engineering has become such a nomenclature for the abduction cases, the Greys and whatever. They grab people and take them against their will and put probes up them and all kinds of things and take their eggs and make babies from them, on and on and on, which is actually true. But there's a lot to be said about that from Thoth, which we won't go into here. So that has nothing to do with this kind of genetic engineering. So I would probably use another word. It would still be descriptive of the process, but it wouldn't be so related to, the fearful other kind. This was a kind of genetic work in progress that was done with the full consent and knowledge, to some extent, of the individuals involved. And it was to save the human race, not to, morph it into something something else for the purpose of the agendas of some specific, off-world, not involved races. These genetic engineering principles were brought forth from our ancestors, from our kindred, not just ancestors, but kindred. And they were helping to repair what the Anunnaki and all that had done to us. So it was a far different thing. I wanted to state that before we continue here. John Martinus was to become the first Templar, from which the Knights Templar descended. Actually, there weren't Templars of a sort as far back as Lemuria, but apparently not a true precursor of the order as was John Martinus. From the son of the king, let me try that again. From this son of the Sun King also sprang the Frankish Merovingian dynasty. But Thoth stresses that the Merovingians were for the most part not a kin worthy of their ancestry. There was an inner core group that was both knowledgeable and worthy, and it was to the credit of this secret order within the larger dynasty that the Grail mysteries were preserved. But that is another story. In returning to the Galatanes, we see them more clearly defined through this brief detour. As descendants of Torhana, they were cousins to the Martinus lineage. Now, I don't know if I say this here somewhere, but I'm going to say it now just in case I don't. And that is Torhana, the soul of Torhana. And I've never been told that there was anything but one soul there, would become the soul of Mary, the mother of Jesus. So it all relates beautifully. And the hosting skull for the dweller crystal skull of a soul that became Torhana at some point is here on the altar. I have to be careful how I word this to be clear, because Torhana could actually have a crystal skull too. I don't know. But it's the same soul as the one that has a dweller skull that I am aware of and that I have a hosting skull for. So you can see how complex this can get when you understand some of these principles that are involved here. I really wish I had a more simplistic version of all of this, of the incarnational thing and the dweller crystal skulls and how they relate to the process of that incarnational pathing. I really should do something very specific just on that, although I've mentioned it and I've brought it forward again and again and again, because I have to explain it each time we come up on something like this for people that have not heard me say it a few thousand times before. But I wish I had just one thing that outlined this, and I can do that. It's just that there's only so much time in a day. But I will put that on my list. So we have talking about Torhana, who was a key player in all of this lineage business here. As descendants of Torhana, the Galatanes would have been cousins to the Martinus lineage. Merlin's mother, Mary Grace, bore an even closer Christic lineage. She had been given her name, for at her birth, all in the room saw the mother of Christ hover near the babe. Mary Grace's mother was a part Jewish Christian and a direct descendant of Joseph of Arimathea, uncle of Joshua ben Joseph, Jesus Christ. Hestor from the house of Galatane married Mary Grace from the house of Arimathea in a Celtic Christian ceremony at the foot of the Holy Hill, later to become Chalice Hill, not Tor Hill, but Chalice Hill in Glastonbury at Somerset, England. It was in that age called the Holy Hill, for it had been this place which was consecrated by Jesus when he made his second journey to Glastonbury as a young man. The first trip had been as a boy with his uncle Joseph. Later, his son, John Martinus, would build an inner temple beneath the hill, which was sealed away after his death. Hester and Mary Grace made their home on the Isle of Man, where the shining one of Hester's vision had brought him. From the eyes of the most elusive being, Hester had been given the sight. He had witnessed the sky jewel, meteor fragment, strike man, long before his birth, cracking the earth and burrowing deep within the cold winter ground. From that small crack came forth a spring, from which followed a sparkling creek, igniting fertility to burst aflame along its pathing banks. This was obviously one of those Genesis comets that Thoth speaks about, that are not just half-stones. They are created by in the ultra realms and sent to planets to create certain, Genesis paths, creational fields. And this would have been one of those. Now, would this qualify as a Chinamani stone? Probably not. But I'm not exactly sure about that at this point. And I don't want to try to go off receiving information on that right now. But in any case, it would have been a Genesis comet or meteor, I'm sorry. All this Hester had seen in the mirror light of the Shining One. Thus he needed no common hand to guide him to the sacred spring, for it brimmed within his heart and flowed without hindrance through his seeking mind. When Hester handed his young bride, no, that's not right. No, it's and. It's a typo there. When Hester and his young bride arrived at the spring, he built a home nearby of yew tree and deer hide. Here MERLIN sought the psalm of life, grasping it eagerly with his strong lungs, in the dawn of what is now set down as September 15th, the year of our Lord, 363, at 5:58 a.m. We do have a chart in here on Merlin's birth, and we will get to that in a future chapter. The revelation of the sky jewel meteor creating the spring, something Hester was shown in a vision from the past, was given to me by Thoth in 1987. Since then, I have received the information on the meteor fragments which represented the seeding of sacred energy on the planet. In issue 390 of Temple Doors, Thoth reveals that the dream of Gilgamesh, where he saw the host of heaven fall down toward me, was the meteor shower of this divine event, and that these shards are pieces of the slag of a great explosion of worlds, the molten remains of these domains expelled from heaven's gate. Oh, okay. So I'm going to correct what I said. This is probably one of the Chinamani stones, if that's what this relationship is here. Of these 22 fragments, one was made into the Grail cup of the Last Supper, and another transmuted into the Archangel stone, which now lies beneath the sarcophagus of Torhanna inside Tor Hill at Glastonbury. It is obvious that traveling back through time, Hester was made witness, just as was Gilgamesh in his dream, to this spectacular event. And now his son was born by a spring created through the alchemical grail from heaven. Yes, it would definitely have been a Chinamani stone. Okay, here we go. I'm going to turn the page. Oops, sorry. The child MERLIN dwelt in a world between human and nature, touching both, yet aware, even in youth, that he would never be truly accepted by either realm. MERLIN's father felt the burden as well. He became troubled and haunted in dreams by his own fears. He was sorely tempted by the dark side in the flexing of a power that brought security to his feelings of instability. The story of Hestor of Galatane, his temptations, trials, and eventual triumph is a book unto itself. I will not in this writing venture into that forest, yet it need be known that Hester fell from grace, not only in the sight of God, but in the eyes of his lovely Mary Grace. When she found her beloved to be a practitioner of the dark face, he who masks the light, and no longer following the star-sent gaze of the Shining One, Mary Grace fled the sacred grove of the Sky Jewel Spring, taking her 3-year-old son with her. She left Hester to his wanton magic in a dark cavern near the grove, and went out into the night, the child conceived of her husband's light clutched to her breast. Boy, would it be interesting to hear Hester's whole story. But I just don't have, at this time of my life, in my 69th year, I do not have the strength or the fortitude to write a whole book about Hester. But it is a shame, and I'm sure someone will come along in some other time and tap the Akasha or be tapped on the shoulder by Thoth and say, hey, do I have a book for you? And so it will be written at some point in time, probably. Mary Grace found refuge in the Convent of Shoreham, a Celtic pagan Christian convent on the Crystal Isle of Glastonbury, near the holy hill of her wedding. Yet even the sacred waters of its well could not flush the tears of sorrow buried deep in her heart. Hester was driven from man by his brother and sisters. He went into Wales, he went into Wales to dwell for the rest of his life. Upon his deathbed, in the last moments of life, the full measure of his faith was restored, and through the grace of the Shining One, he returned in etheric body to the spring of the Sky Jewel. There he found Merlin inside the dark cave where Hester had fallen from light. Merlin and his father stood together for the first time since Mary Grace took her babe from the grove on that terrible eve. Hester's etheric body was as strong as his power. Dark or light had always been. The two men embraced, and Hester pressed into his son's hand the amethyst key. The older Galatane was then consumed in light, and as a tide slipping from a sunlit shore, he departed his son and his life, emancipated from darkness forever. With the amethyst key, Merlin opened the Book of Worlds, each page inscribed by the racial mind, entwining the ages of man within the ageless realm of nature and spirit. The amethyst key was a divining rod, in the form of a key. It had been crafted of sacred fire in Atlantis by the masters of the Blue Star, Rigel. It in itself, like any tool of divining, was merely a potent source of focus for the power within the controlling entity. Thus, from his father, Merlin received the path to his own power, as we all must come upon the path made for us by our preceding generation in overcoming darkness. Light takes its strength. So the old cavern of Hester's fall, you got to turn another page, from grace was transformed by his son into a palace of crystal quartz. In this sanctuary, fasted from the sun's dance, the crystal walls were lit from the flame of Merlin's spirit, burning deeply into the tallow of his own soul. During 28 years of his exceptionally long life, he lived longer than 28 years, but it's saying, the sentence isn't correctly structured, okay, but it means that for 28 years of his exceptionally long life, he spent many hours within this cavern writing the testament given him through the amethyst key. He entitled it The Books of the Grove, later known as the Grove Books of Merlin. And here I have just one small quote from the Books of the Grove. It's kind of cryptic. I actually don't understand it, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. O thou who shall no longer comfort me, to thee is given my power and glory. Stake not my heart upon the fiery sword of truth, for my love of thee is beyond the chasm that separates men from gods. And so we continue. Because I must of necessity gather momentum at this point, we open the book on the life of Merlin, many chapters hence from his receipt of the amethyst key, to find him fast upon his chosen work. The focus of this work was programming for future restoration, the Earth's network of etheric ley lines corresponded to the geophysical structure of the planet. What remained of the crystal canopy after Atlantis' destruction was fast decaying. Merlin, with the memory of his life as Thoth of Racemus, worked to set into the ethers certain keys or signals for future realignment of the Earth's etheric and physical axis and accompanying ley line balances. He selected from among the pagan initiates of the age those whose service was destined to be twined with his. These he sent into schools for preliminary instruction if they were not already knowledgeable. They were then brought back to him for attunement to the inner mysteries. As Grand Illuminary, MERLIN brought to each of his following the sight that had been passed to him through the blood of Galatine. In fact, it was this very elixir in his veins, a product of the three sacred paths converging, the Christic, Orion, and Fairy, that quickened his living form to become the grail for the knowledge that flowed through him. This gift was a portal brought into focus through his genetic vine, which found root in the racial mind of the three paths. It was the need for continuity of these streamings that brought MERLIN to the next threshold, that of engendering his strain into the new and tender matrix which was being formed like early frost upon a budding tree. This new pattern, coming from the hierarchy blueprint, was the bridging together of the Celtic Druidic paganism, the knowledge and practices of the goddess or divine nature of earth and woman-man, and Judeo-Christian doctrine, the divine Father-Son aspected through the descending of the Holy Spirit into mankind. When the genetics of MERLIN, of Galatine, the crucible, no, I'm sorry, let me start that sentence again. Within the genetics of MERLIN of Galatine, the crucible for this merging was contained. In the substance of life carried from one generation to another, we find the pure energy of manifestation. Each family unit spins its own patterning of this energy, which all together creates a synergy of the racial mind, that which explores, expands, separates, and unites the many directions of spiritual experiences through the culture and races of humanity. Thus MERLIN, master of the mound, also known as master of the stone, sought divine guidance in choosing the vessels that would carry his seed to fruition for the fulfillment of the new world matrix. And so, let's look at this for a moment. If we go back really far into Atlantis and Lemuria, we find that, well, not maybe the last part of Atlantis, no, they really got kind of messed up there. But we're going to go back to Lemuria and the first part of Atlantis, because Atlantis lasted a long time. And so if we look at that period of time, the incarnational cycles that took place were very aware. Now, they may not have known all of their past lives, but at that point in time, they didn't have a lot of them to know in the earthly realm. And people weren't incarnating so diversely in that period of time. And they lived such long lives. They didn't need, see, the problem, there's so much to this, I don't know where to begin, and I don't want to get off on a whole thing. I probably should do a whole video just on that, but to make it as concise as possible here and as brief as possible. Things got out of hand, okay? We started out simply, incarnation here, incarnation there, just, following a path, a course of spiritual light and development. No big deal, right? But as we started, experimenting in ways that possibly were not the best paths to follow, then we needed more incarnations because we were caught in this karmic cycle thing, and we wanted to make it work and try to get back to where we were, and it's like a Rubik cube or something. So we had to follow this path, and no, that didn't work. Dead end. Go over here, follow that path. And so we had all these incarnations popping out, and in multiple dimensions and realities and timelines and all this stuff. And it just kept, like baby rabbits, it just kept going. So, but if you go back to the beginning, our incarnational cycles were very simple and to the point of what we needed to be doing. That meant that when we came into a lifetime and we joined with one of the opposite sex for procreation, it was a choice well made, because we were doing so through grace, not through karma. And so there were no uh-ohs involved, you know. It all worked. And when that worked, again, it fed back into the incarnational cycle in a right way. You didn't have children that were born into a karmic love match, so to speak, or sexual match, or whatever. So it worked. It all worked. Now, of course, in those really early days, there were no marriage, and it was not monogamous. And you know, they had different partners, but not a lot different here and there and whatever. But it was brought in for the purpose, the right purpose. That's not to say that it was not love involved, but it was a higher love, a deeper love, a more aware love. And there were no personal attachments that got sticky and kept people in relationships that that now were concluded in that way, and people needed to move on. Now, I'm not saying that right now in this particular period of time that would work out very well, because we aren't attracting people for the right reasons, and we aren't attracted to people for the right reasons. Sometimes we are, you know, but I mean, for the most part, even the best of relationships are not as aligned as they were in those days. So those who still carry that spiritual concept and ability to farsightedness and ability to understand that, even in the age of MERLIN, would have followed that course. Even though at that time what had happened was that they took the principle of marrying specifically for genetic reasons, and they distorted it horribly. You know, I mean, you had kings marrying so that their progeny would, you know, ascend the throne, and they'd have the right geopolitical connections. You know, all of this stuff that was way, 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 way off base. But the original version was still within the heart and minds of such luminaries, and there were a few of them in those days, as MERLIN. And so that was his path to follow. Okay, to continue with the manuscript. Three quite different women over a span of 11 years gave to MERLIN one daughter and 3 sons. It need be understood that these 3 females were all initiates of the goddess, although the last one embraced the dark goddess. That we'll get to that story in a minute. They were knowledgeable and willing participants in the act of genetic engineering. Again, those words I would rather not be using. Planned through divine guidance. Except for his true love, Maria, MERLIN knew intimately each of these women only for the purpose of conceiving, and was otherwise celibate throughout his life. They therefore were not his wives or lovers, but co-workers in spirit, other than for those brief selected times with him resulting in conception. They led their own lives, and for one, a marriage and other children. Those of the entire entourage of MERLIN were either from the house of Galatine by blood or marriage, or, as in the case of one of these 3 women mentioned here, as mother of MERLIN's child Ru of the dark side, or initiates from outside the Galatine clan, yet accepted as kindred spirits into the circle. This circle became an order known as the Eye of the Fawn. The order did not live communally. They came together for special ceremony, initiation, schooling, and preordained light work. Between times, they dispersed into villages and towns throughout Great Britain, as well as some into France. The woman to Mother MERLIN's first child, in fact, was not a part of human reality. She was a fairy, 7th daughter of the fairy queen of Avalon. Avalon was a dimensional fairy state, with its window or touching point through the etheric grid being most prominent at Glastonbury. Well, of course, it wasn't even called Glastonbury then, but that was the point. The convent of Shoreham, where young girls were taught the psalms of the goddess and the heart of the Christ, was a point between the two lands, visible in both worlds. It was at Shoreham that Merlin first saw Maria. He was opened to her beauty and suffered the sweet agony of flesh laid bare to a rose's thorn. Wow, that's rather poetic. Let me read that again because I didn't do it well. He was open to her beauty and suffered the sweet agonies of flesh laid bare to a rose's thorn. The young Merlin, but 29 years of age, 4 years into his full ministry, was stricken as all mortals, even half mortals are, with the enchantment of a fairy princess. While genetic engineering was most certainly at work here, the goddess of nature and the god of man were mindful of the youth whom they held in their service and smiled upon him. For in the experience of loving a woman, so Merlin became human to the effort of love's first moments as it stretches its untried wings into the sky. Through loving Maria, he was to receive what every great teacher must have, the ability to be human, to identify with the alternate sufferings and joys of his students. Thus was given to Merlin in spiritual ceremony Maria, daughter of the lily. Maria brought into the light of Avalon 2 of Merlin's children. Merlin spent 3 years in Avalon with his beloved, 3 human years, as time is set by a different clock in that realm. When he returned, he brought his daughter and son with him. This was as had been ordained and was understood by both Merlin and Maria before the children had been born. They would return to Avalon many times, yet for the most part they dwelt in the human world. The daughter was named Mercedes Adora, the son Heathclorin. Now I find it interesting that there are these Spanish names in there, Maria and Mercedes, which are, as far as I know, Spanish names, but this was what was given to me. Mercedes Adora would become a mistress of the mound, carrying on her father's work. While unknown to history, she worked closely with powerful agents of light in that age who held open the last gates to cosmic union. Heathclorin would marry into a Christian family who eventually sired a king of France. It was from Heathclorin that the Merovingians received their direct lineage to John Martinus through both the Galatanes and the, oh boy, here's a big name, Awermenhins, Awermehins, which is Mary Grace's family. Merlin's second son was born to him by Amenia, a mortal who had wandered a great distance from a northern isle, having been cast out by her tribe. They were remnants of an ancient band of nomads who had been upon the British Isles before the advent of the Celtic culture. Amenia's son was Haybarth. Like Mercedes, he would take up the mantle of his father, even to the fate of being sealed within a cavern. Yet Haybarth's life was essentially in turmoil, as he was unable to come to terms with his own personality, separating it from the greater self and the service of that higher order. So you can see, even with quote-unquote genetic engineering, at least by the time that Merlin was alive, things didn't always still go well. Merlin's third son, Ian, was born during the eclipse of the moon. The child's mother was Rue, R-U-E, a maiden of the Dark Queen Lilith. It was here that we come to the greater inner mystery of Merlin's chronicles, as we are brought back to the side of darkness within us. It is also here that a great and dramatic part of Merlin's life must be untold for now, as it would require more telling than has been allotted within this space. A brief discourse only of Merlin and Rue can be given here. Merlin was slipped a hypnotic drug by Rue, whereupon she proceeded to effectively seduce him. This task had been appointed to her by Lilith, who wished to become involved in Merlin's genetic engineering for her own purposes. In that age, while there were those that could pass through the goblin doors into Avalon, well, that would also be called now the doorway. I think I don't know why Thoth gave me the goblin doorway. Maybe he was just being poetic, but it was at the time called the Mer doorway. Most could not. Let me read that sentence again, okay? In that age, there were those who could pass through the goblin Akka Mer doorway into Avalon. Most could not. It usually required a vibrant strain of fairy blood to do so, something which Lilith and her following lacked, at least in its rarefied and therefore qualified form. The result of this conspiracy perpetuated on MERLIN was a son who was very much a neutral child. He seemed positioned on the brink of eternity, afraid to leap in either direction. Ironically, MERLIN saw his experience with Ru not as an evil encounter, but part of the divine plan, that darkness may once again be transformed to light, fortifying the latter. As a soul is raised above the mire, so more power is given to lift others from similar faiths. It is like in a gathering of eagles in high places, for each that soars upward from the valley floor, so another follows suit. The hand cannot but touch the sick if it is to cleanse the wound. And so it was from the generation of the last child, Ion, son of a prince of light and maiden of darkness, that a holy night was chosen. Growing into manhood, Ion was not allowed contact with his father, as were his siblings. Although an attempt was made, Ru was not successfully converted. After a false try, she withdrew from the circle, back into the embrace of the reigning Dark Queen, Liliana, on the throne of Lilith. Now I have an asterisk by that, and I want to see where that asterisk leads me. Lilith was a title, whereas Liliana was the name, no doubt bestowed on the reigning Lilith Queen. Ru was determined that Ion not know his father's world. Thus Merlin's third son became a defiant young man serving neither side, living without, living without faith. Nevertheless, ancient stirrings built up within him, for the blood of Galatane was heady stuff, even when it coursed through the veins of the unbelieving. Ion married in his 17th year to a young girl from the Isle of Iona. Although he did not know it at the time, his bride was quite versed in her family's religion, her mother having spent a year at the convent of Shoreham. Her grandmother had been a priestess of Gwena in the Celtic Ionian mysteries. It was from the Ionian mysteries that the priestess Elaine had been chosen to guardian the son of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Iona was the birthplace of this sacred link, and still contains testament to the event buried within a chamber beneath the sod of the island. Bromella, as Ion's wife, was another planned episode, but that is not to say she did not love her young husband, who, beneath a veneer of sarcasm, yearned to find his spiritual self. The child born of their union was Myrith, pronounced that wrong. It was Myyrith, but it's pronounced Murith, grandson to the master of the mound, a grandfather he would be kept from knowing until his 14th year. It was then that his father and grandfather reached an agreement and a somewhat uneasy communion. Murith was at least allowed to drink from the sacred springs of Merlin's heart and mind. In a vision, Merlin was told by his father that Murith was the chosen one to ascend the throne of a new order consciousness, bringing together the realm of the goddess and the world of Christ in man. Yet this, in the final tally, was not to be. Had Merlin been able to share his spirit with Murith from the child's birth, it would have been accomplished, but Ion had kept Murith from his grandfather until the door was closed. Divine timing was the yardstick for the ascendancy of blood lineages in that era, and the moment of a Galatane throne had passed. Instead, Merlin acted as emissary to bring another child into the world for this purpose. The momentum achieved through the Galatane lineage had been disrupted, and now Merlin knew it must pass into another family, that of Pendragon. The Pendragons were still within the David lineage, the Christ tree, being related to the Galatanes from Merlin's mother through Joseph of Arimathea. Arimathea? Never sure how to pronounce that. But even as Merlin orchestrated Arthur's entrance into his earthly cradle, he now had his grandson beside him, and the bond between them grew. Mirth was eager for the touch of light, and he burnished brighter and brighter near the flame. So this is going to conclude the first chapter, or the first reading rather, in the Merlin Chronicles. Stay tuned for part 2.